Thank you very much for joining me for this navigation or exploration. Number 9. This is Kasujiro Miyoshi. Today, I will talk about Elisha quoted English Dictionary 1676 under the title Elisha quotes and the group of entries, his use of linking phrases and search for derivatives and their root forms, which is based on my presentation at the International Congress at UC. Section 1, Introduction. In the compilation process of his English Dictionary, 1676, Elisha Coates invented a unique lexicographical technique, the which Starnes and Noyes counted it as one of Coates' real contributions to English lexicography and summarized it as cited at number 1 of the slide. 5 decades later, Noel Osselton sharpened up Starnes and Noyes' terminology, changing groups of related words to entries with cross-lemma definitions and linked entries as seen at number 2. He then gave the following example of the group of entries from Coates' dictionary as shown at number 3. Osselton returned to the point 14 years later, describing such an arrangement of entries as pleasingly jaunty and observing as cited at number 4. As suggested in Starnes and Noyes' remarks, as well as Osselton's, Coates can be regarded as having developed the prototype of the lexicographical technique for the dictionary of English derivatives. For instance, there are 1163 entries for words beginning with the letter L in his dictionary, and 220 of them belong to groups of linked entries. There are 102 such groups in all. His predecessors had hardly ever attempted to link entries like this. I have investigated this technique in a previous study analyzing entries within the range L in my paper, The Making of Elisha Coates Linked Entries, in the journal Lexicographica. In that paper, I demonstrated that 3/4 of the words in these linked entries had been registered in earlier English dictionaries. However, this paper left two crucial questions unexamined. First, how did Coates develop the technique of holding these entries together with linking phrases? Second, how did he search for the words which appeared in his linked entries and not in previous English dictionaries? The aim of the present paper is to address these two questions by investigating the same range of linked entries in Coates' dictionary as I treated in my previous paper. Coates' creative use of earlier English dictionaries is as important here as his fresh awareness of word classes. So I shall compare it with its 5 predecessors in the monolingual English hard word tradition, namely Robert Cowdrey's Table Alphabetical 1604, John Blocker's English Expositor 1616, Henry Cochrane's English Dictionary 1623, Thomas Blount's Glossographia 1656, and Edward Phillips's New World of English Words 1658. I will work on the hypothesis that Coates utilized these dictionaries in reverse chronological order, referring most frequently to the most recent published dictionary. Section 2, Coates' use of linking phrases and unprecedented arrangement of entries. Section 2.1 Overview. I will divide this section into two subsections. In the first subsection, I will point out the fact that codes in linking entries was frequently free from alphabetical order, and that this is, in large part, because of his use of special types of linking phrases. In the second subsection, I will investigate the background and historical significance of such linking phrases. As we have seen, Osselton was generally appreciative of Coates' grouping of connected entries. He did, however, comment critically on the arrangement of entries within these groups, observing that they are not always in alphabetical order, as shown at number 5. Coase was a lexicographer who recognized the importance of arranging dictionary entries in alphabetical order. However, as far as his groups of entries are concerned, as Osselton suggested, it was actually Coates' frequent practice to disregard the order. For instance, as indicated at number 6, when he provided 10 entries from labdanum to laboriferous, in which the entries on lability and labil are grouped, he arranged them as seen. Here, in similar examples, I will underline relevant entries. In this sequence, it is clear that two entries of the 10 are arranged out of alphabetical order. Such a tendency is seen quite frequently in Coates' dictionary. I have mentioned two other examples at number 7. My analysis of the 102 groups of entries in the L's of his dictionary showed that Coates only arranged entries in just under half of the groups in alphabetical order. 50 groups are alphabetized and 52 are not. Did he then arrange entries in the non-alphabetical groups in a wayward or arbitrary manner? I do not think so. Coates' departure from alphabetical order in his groups of entries was very often motivated by the linking phrases which he preferred to use. Deploying the right linking phrase took precedence over preserving alphabetical order. Let us look at some examples within the range of the L's in his dictionary. Coates, as shown at number 8, use 6 phrases more than once to link entries, the figures in parentheses indicating the frequency of their appearance. Here, the 6 groups of entries showing the 6 linking phrases in action. In 4 groups out of the 6, the use of the linking phrase determines the order of the entries and resulting in a sequence which is not in alphabetical order. The situation is indicated at number 9. These 6 phrases articulate 45 groups of entries in the range L of Coates' dictionary, slightly less than half of the 102 groups of entries in the range as a whole. However, it should be confirmed here that Coates did not deliberately overturn alphabetical order in connecting entries. For instance, in the example at number 10, where 3 entries are connected, the entries are arranged alphabetically because of the word forms of the head words. Finding the right linking phrase mattered more to Coates than preserving alphabetical order, but he had no objection to preserving alphabetical order when the linking phrase allowed him to do so. Section 2.2 background and significance of the linking phrase. However, what inspired Coles to use such linking phrases? And how are the phrases useful? As to his use of the linking phrases, it is evident that Coles was considerably inspired by the dictionaries before his. This fact will become clear when we, for instance, as indicated at number 11, collect the entry on logist in Phillips's New World and coded group comprised of the entries on logist and logistic art. In citing the set of entries hereinafter, I will use two types of underlined to indicate words and phrases to be noted. Here is another example at number 12, in which Coates' entry is based on one of Blount's rather than on corresponding entry in Phillips's dictionary. Okay? Coates, in this way, often utilize Phillips's or Blount's practice in providing the groups of entries with the use of the linking phrases, the details of which are shown in Table 1 at number 13. Here, I set all entries in the L's of Coates' dictionary, which include the 6 commonest types of linking phrases, and indicate those where traces of his reference to Phillips's entries and Blount's are detected by using the abbreviation PH for the former and BL for the latter. I should emphasize that Coates' use of linking phrases, which is a characteristic feature or even the core feature in his forming groups of entries, was not simply carried over from the use of those phrases in the entries of earlier dictionaries. Far from it. Truly, Coates learned much from the dictionaries before his, especially from Phillips's and Blount's. At the same time, however, it is also an undeniable fact that Coates, in this respect, developed innovation by imitating a lexicographical technique which had been established at his time. We can clarify this point by analyzing Coates' use of the two commonest linking phrases in a sample, namely belonging to, a or the, and a or the being. One, the phrase belonging to a or the. As to the linking phrase belonging to a or the, Table 1 showed that Coates copied the phrase from Phillips's and Blount's entries in 11 out of 21 of his groups of entries. However, in the remaining 10 entries, Coates uniquely used the phrase since none of the dictionaries before his contained the phrase in the corresponding entries as seen at number 14. Coates tended to use the linking phrase belonging to a or the whenever he had an occasion to contrast a derivative adjective with the noun from which the adjective is derived, whether the phrase was suggested by other dictionaries or not. Here are two more examples of groups of entries where Coates' use of the linking phrase was not suggested by previous dictionaries, in which we can again see that the pattern he is pointing out is that of derived adjective and noun as shown at number 15. 2. The phrase a or the being. In Coates' use of the phrase a or the being, we can see his innovative development of linking phrases having reached a higher degree. In providing the relevant groups of entries, he clearly often referred to dictionaries before his, as seen in the use of the two phrases, black and blue, and leaden color, in the instance shown at number 16. However, as to the linking phrase a or the being, as also indicated in Table 1, not a single lexicographer of the English dictionary before Coles and had used in the counterparts of the relevant 14 entries. Coles surely invented it by himself, being inspired by other linking phrases which are seen in the dictionaries before him. He used this phrase in order to contrast derivative nouns with the adjectives from which they are derived. The converse situation to the one in which he used the phrase belonging to a or the. Here are three more examples from the 14 groups of entries articulated by this phrase at number 17. Cole's use of this phrase may have been the first time in the history of English lexicography that an attempt had been made to express the relationship between abstract nouns like limpidity and the adjective from which they were derived. I have thus far analyzed Cole's unprecedented arrangement of entries in grouping them and his unique use of linking phrases, which caused it, investigating the historical background and significance. In performing the practice, Coles was strongly inspired by the dictionaries before his, but at the same time, there will be no denying the fact that none of the lexicographers before him had connected entries with linking phrases to anything like the extent that he did. As we have seen in the examples of which we have discussed, codes usually tended to provide the entry on the derivative before the entry for its root form. In this regard, Osselton, who made critical remarks about Cole's disregard of alphabetical order, as we have seen earlier, also criticized the fact that the base word had dropped to final position in one example of Cole's groups of entries which Osselton cited. However, if Cole's intention lay in explaining the derivative with its root form, what Osselton pointed out could be counted as a positive feature of the group of entries. Section 3 coded ways to find derivatives and their root form. Section 3.1 Overview. In the list at number 18, I show which head word, or in one case, word in the definition, in blank of Phillips inspired codes, which new head word he introduced, and when, according to the OED, that word appears first to be attested in written English. Okay. Section 3.2 four patterns in providing a brand new entries based on derivational relationships. In what way, then, did Coase find and notice the new head word in his dictionary which were either derivative or root forms, which had been headword in previous dictionaries, or roots of derived forms, which had been headwords in previous dictionaries. He seems to have had four methods there. One, starting with the root form and giving a derivative. Two, starting with one derived form and giving another. Three, starting with a derived form and giving its root. And four, starting with a compound word and giving one of its elements. Four, starting with a compound word and giving one of its elements. I showed the example for each of them at number 19. 1. Starting with root form and giving a derivative. We can also see such a pattern of practice in his treatment of the word liability and low balance. 2. Starting with one derived from starting with one derived form and giving another. A similar pattern is evident in Cody's treatment of the word lozenge, Loseng. 3. Starting with a derived form and giving its root. This type of practice can also be seen in his treatment of the following word: Lacedaemon, Lacedaemonia, which is the city name, Lamba, Latant, Lepri, Dixib, Dixibia, Lixibium, and Luna. 4. Starting with a compound word and giving one of its elements. Okay. Section 4, Conclusion. More than any other 17th century English hardware lexicographer, it was Coles who laid special emphasis on the treatment of English derivatives. His use of phrases to link entries and his gathering of newly elaborate sets of derivationally related forms are both distinctive. As to the former, it is highly useful in knowing the relation between the derivative and its root form, as well as that between the derivatives of the same root. As to the latter, this fact is commonly acknowledged among authorities on the history of English lexicography. However, it seems to have scarcely been noticed to date that the two features became realized with Cody's full utilization of the English dictionaries before his. In this sense, Codes, who extensively and closely read the dictionaries, thus achieving innovation, may be called a lexicographer of highly creative imitation. Cody's dictionary is the sixth and last general dictionary in the first century of the history of English lexicography. With this dictionary, the achievements of the lexicographers before him evolved, for one thing, into the formulation of the prototype of technique to treat the derivative and its root form. These are cited references in my presentation. Thank you very much for joining me. If you find the topic this time interesting, it is expounded in detail in my paper, as you see.